This is a continuation from yesterday where I was answering some questions from an inquirist that was commenting on my videos. And I think I stopped at what commandments should we keep? Because again, and this is still stemming from dietary law. Do Christians have to keep the diet law, so-called diet law, that the Israelites kept in the Old Testament? And the last question I answered from the inquiry she sent was, what commandment should we keep? And hopefully I've answered that. And there's been some really good comments on the video, so we're having a really good dialogue. So I hope we can keep it going and, keep learning. So now I'm going to deal with your next question. I believe was Romans 14. Well, actually, you talked about John 17 previous to that, but I won't touch that at this point. I'll get straight to Romans 14. And this is where, and I'll read the statement and then I'll comment on the statement. So Romans 14:14 is referring to meat that had been sacrificed to idols. The word used there is koinos, a Greek word that I can't pronounce, which means common, not unclean. There must have been a difference between common and unclean, or Peter wouldn't have distinguished between the two in Acts 10 and 14. Okay, so Romans 14, I agree with you, is talking about meats that were sacrificed to idols, which goes towards my greater point, which is the apostles have the authority to set doctrine. And this is also going to deal with Paul saying everything that's lawful is not expedient. And once you get an entire picture of this New Testament deal, all of this makes sense. It does to me anyway. Acts 10, or Acts 15 rather, where the Jews were coming and trying to make Christians keep, the Christian Jews were trying to make other Christians, Gentiles particularly, trying to make them keep circumcision and the law of Moses. And Peter stood up and said they don't have to keep circumcision or the law of Moses. In fact, if you go down further near the bottom of that chapter, around about after the 24th verse, Paul is, after he tells them that he and the apostles never taught those things, Paul will then go on to tell them to abstain from meats that are sacrificed to idols. He told them to abstain from those meats. Well, then in Romans 14, he okayed it. He said it's okay to eat meats that are sacrificed to idols. So why the double standard, it seems, from Paul in regard to meat sacrificed to idols? Because again, remember, Paul says, though it may be lawful, in other words, not a violation of the word of God, of its law, it may not be expedient. And in Acts is when the church was just getting going. And Paul didn't want to, if you realize, Paul was crucified, persecuted, along with just about every other apostle and many other Christians at that time, from religious people, from Jews, because they didn't agree with what they were saying about God's law. So Paul was saying, and this is my thinking, that in Acts 15, the church was just getting going. They had some Jews that was bucking against what he was teaching, and to kind of smooth things over, if you will, and this is just me, I think Paul was telling them in Acts 15 to abstain from those meat sacrificed to idols, so it won't be a contention between them and the Jews. And again, that's what I think Paul was doing. But we know for a fact Paul told them to abstain from meat sacrificed to idols. And when we get to Romans 14, as you just admitted in your statement, he's talking about meat sacrificed to idols, saying it's okay. So you got to look at this, like I said, in the whole picture, and you'll see that it's not Paul having a double standard. He's just doing things that are lawful, but may not be expedient at the time. So hopefully that makes sense. Then your next statement was, Jesus warned the Pharisees of adding to the law. I won't deal with that. You really didn't have a question there. Under that, you say, the Bible does not say why God told them to eat unclean things. It says that he said not to and told them what they were. To say that it is for health purposes or to say that it was ceremonial would be speculation, filling in the blanks. I never said it was for health purposes, although that does not make more sense to me. The fact is, it doesn't matter to me why he said what he said. And then this is the part I'm going to deal with. Well, I'll just start from there. So I presented to her that, and the reason this question came up is because you asked, why would God give a law in the Old Testament, and then when it gets to the New Testament, change the law? And you were saying that that doesn't make sense. And I pointed out that the law, dietary law, changed 3 times in the Old Testament alone. So it's not a New Testament, Old Testament thing. God changed that law more than once. And I'm going to prove it here as well. No, Adam and Eve were only allowed to eat fruits, vegetables, and herbs. In Genesis chapter 2, God said, this is meat for food. And he pointed to the fruits, vegetables, and herbs. And he also said that it's meat for food for the animals as well. So that didn't give him an option to have anything else as meat for food. Did Adam eat anything else as meat for food? Of course, I don't know. I wasn't there. But we know what the law was. The law was meat for food are trees, vegetables, and herbs. Not only for Adam and Eve, but for the animals as well. And you'll see that in Genesis 2, where he says, this is also meat for food for the animals. He never gave Adam the okay to eat anything outside of what he told him to eat. So now you may say, well, so basically what I'm saying is he didn't have to exclude animals because he never gave them the okay. So now you may say, well, he excluded a particular tree. He excluded the tree of life. This is true because previous to that, he told them that all the trees in the garden were meat for food. All of them. So he had to exclude the one he didn't want them to eat. And when it comes to meat, he didn't have to exclude a particular kind of animal because he never gave them the okay to eat any animals. Okay, so that was the first law for animals and for Adam, that they could only eat fruits, vegetables, and herbs. Then when you get to Noah in Genesis 7, I believe, when he was loading the ark, the Bible talks about clean and unclean animals, and it didn't say anything about Adam eating those animals. It just called them clean and unclean. And as I pointed out, that was purely religious. That's all it was. It was just, and when I say religious and ceremonial, all I'm saying is, one, some of those animals were used for ceremonies, which is obvious throughout the Bible. And some of the unclean animals were unclean just because God said they were unclean. So when I say religiously, that's what I'm saying, because God said so. Just no other explanation was given. So Adam had the law of what he could eat, and that law transferred to Noah. That was still the law in Noah's day until Genesis 9, when Noah got off the ark. And the reason I know this, I'm going to read Genesis 9 for you. Genesis 9 verse 3. This is when Noah was getting off the ark. God said, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I give you the green plants, I give you everything. I'm going to read the NIV version because it makes it a little bit more clear. The NIV version says, everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. So when he told Noah, when Noah was getting off the ark in Genesis 9, that everything that lives and moves will be food for you, just as I've given you herbs and plants, now I give you everything. So obviously he hadn't given him everything because he just did. I mean, I don't see how anybody can pull anything else from that. He just gave Moses or Noah everything to eat for meat, everything that moves on the earth for meat. So that would have to mean that before that, God never gave it to him. Can't give him something twice. So the law now allows Noah to eat meats. And God never excluded any kinds of meat except for, if you read verse 4, except for meat that still had blood in it, alive. So it had to be cooked meat. So that was the only exclusion. And now it's going to change again when you get to Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 11. Leviticus chapter 11:1 says, "And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, say to the Israelites, these are the animals which ye may eat among all the beasts on the earth." And then he went on to give a long list of what animals they could eat and what animals they couldn't eat. If he says, say to the Israelites, these are the meats you may eat, and then after that gave them the meats they could eat, and right after that excluded the meats they couldn't eat, the law just changed again. So to your question to me, your question to me was, why would God give a law and then change it? It doesn't make sense. And why would God give a law in the Old Testament and then change it in the New Testament? It doesn't make sense. Well, you got to ask yourself the question, why would God change the law 3 times before it got to the New Testament? And my answer to your question is because it's his law. He can do what he wills with his law. And for me, that's good enough. So that's my answer. But answer for me, why would God change that law 3 times as we just saw in the Old Testament? Adam could only eat herbs and fruits and vegetables. Noah could only eat herbs, fruits, and vegetables until after the ark, Genesis 9, where he got off the ark. Then God allowed him to eat all meats, all things, except for meat with blood in it. And then the 3rd time, Moses and Aaron in Leviticus 11 were given what they could eat and what they couldn't eat in regard to meat, which is where the diet law came along. So hopefully you can answer that question for me. Why would God change it 3 times? And let me know if you can see the fact that God changed it 3 times. If not, tell me why not. And I'm going to get to your next question in a sec.